In 2011, President Obama, in a rare alignment with House Republicans, banned the practice of earmarking. It was an attempt to stop frivolous spending and stifle possible corruption. Over a decade later, pork barrel spending and those earmarks are back. But is slipping in funding for things like the equitable growth of shellfish aquaculture really imperative to cooperation? Or are these closed-door handshakes another example of government's mismanagement of money? This will be a short episode. Stop earmarks and pork barrel spending. Until next time. Okay, fine. Let's talk about this egregious practice. $1.5 trillion with a capital T. The 2022 Omnibus Bill is meant to fund the government through fiscal year 2022, but with an ever-increasing federal deficit, it would be smart to keep spending to a minimum, right? Defenders say earmarks will defrost the severe partisanship that has developed recently. Well, after a decade of the earmark ban, there is a coincidental comparison with entrenched gridlock we saw over that time. And this recent omnibus bill passing with relative ease compared to the past 11th hour passing and extensions seems to support that sentiment. For those of us old enough to remember the reasons that led to the ban, these earmarks can breed corruption and fester. In 2005, Republican Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert procured $207 million in earmark money that was tucked away in a massive $244 billion transportation funding package. This earmark went to be known as the notorious Prairie Parkway. That's not unusual. As annoying and frustrating as it is, politicians actively try and slip funding into pet projects. It's supposed to bolster boosters and incentivize their constituents. But what was different about this, or more likely what exposed the corruption, was the sheer blatantness and stupidity. Hastert and his partners owned 300 acres of non-developed land in the middle of nowhere, Illinois, and purchased it a couple of years before this funding bill was passed. That Prairie Parkway was a 33-mile strip of highway that connected two interstates. It was argued to alleviate traffic and cut down travel time, but it also conveniently passed very near to their land. What was once 300 acres of wilderness now had road access and availability to infrastructure. Hastert and his cronies went on to sell that land for a premium, pocketing millions in profit. Things like that sparked outrage, and it was uncovered that about 6,300 items designated as congressionally directed spending, or earmarks, were woven into that same 2005 funding package. Fast forward to 2022. Earmarks are in full force again, to the tune of an estimated $8 billion tax dollars hidden in that $1.5 trillion omnibus bill. That's yours and my money going to things like artist lofts, a new ski jump, private museums, lots of museums, universities, also private, and even money going to places like highly affluent Palo Alto, California, home to 9 of Forbes' 400 top billionaires, because they're hurting for public funding, I guess. The big winner in this year's earmark sweepstakes is Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He was able to add 142 different pet projects like museums, again, theaters, and rail trails, just to name a few, adding millions in tax dollars to this already ludicrous omnibus. Have I mentioned yet that our country is already over $30 trillion in debt? What about the out-of-control inflation, rising prices, weakening of the US dollar? Probably not a good time to be padding the pockets of constituents when the average American is suffering. Though I am not a fan of taxes, and I find it disturbing that if you don't pay, you're threatened with punishment, which sounds more like extortion than voluntary payment of public funding, but the Constitution did grant Congress powers in levying taxes. But even in the infancy of our nation, we rejected the ideas of excess taxes, spawning actions like the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay, that's a rabbit hole I'm not diving into now, and taxes are an episode all on its own. The point is, taxes should be used for exact purposes. They should have direct impact on society as a whole and should be limited when possible. When proposed, they should be highly scrutinized and transparent. The current re-embrace of earmarks was meant to incorporate that transparency. In 2020, when the resurrection of earmarks was proposed, the House Select Committee were adamant they could create a framework to avoid past abuses, and that approved earmarks would be meaningful, transformative, and community-based grants. Well, that didn't happen. I don't know about you, but rushing the passage of a 2,700 plus page bill within days of it being presented in the middle of the night and having no official monetary or ethics oversight, no website to track earmarks, which, by the way, was one of those framework promises by the House Select Committee, and having no connection within the text that connects lawmakers with their individual earmarks. None of that is very transparent. And that last part is really irritating. There is no direct indication in those 2,700 pages of which politician is requesting what. Meaning we can't even scrutinize our own representatives and how they allocate our taxes so that we can hold them accountable at the voting polls. It takes private watchdogs, reporters, and analysts to sift through that enormous bill of text in an effort to connect the money to location. And that's it. Nothing else to indicate who requested what. It's these massive 1,000-page bills that breed opportunity to slip in egregious funding requests, which, as we see, they have no problem doing. But an effort for fairness, let's not completely negate the correlation between the earmark ban and the gridlock and growing partisanship that occurred the past decade. Like my disdain for taxes and my complacency with government gridlock, I also despise earmarks and pork barrel spending. But my opinions and my perfect idea of America does not align with many Americans, and like any ideology, shouldn't be forced on others. I understand that many are okay with taxes, grants, and government funding. This is why it's imperative when voting for our representatives, well, they actually represent our desires. And we must be willing to compromise, even on tax spending. So, are there things that can be done to at least curtail frivolous expenditure, make earmarks transparent, limit pork barrel spending, and deter opportunity for exploitation? Well, of course. First thing that needs to happen is a limit on the size of a bill. Sure, some require more pages, clauses, appendixes, and such, but make them more precise and easier to interpret, and concentrate on relatable context with spending. Don't add turtle tunnels in education bills or drunk mice study money to infrastructure bills. And we've seen how annoyingly easy it is to pass single-issue bills. The recent unanimous passing in the Senate of the Sunshine Protection Act shows that. It doesn't matter if you're for or against permanent daylight savings time, but this shows when things are simplified, Congress can yay or nay it with ease. Using technology to track and reveal current earmark spending to the lawmaker is another way to keep things transparent. Like I said before, this was an actual suggestion when readopting earmarks, so do it. And to expound on that, allow an open polling period that constituents can review and provide feedback to their representatives' funding requests. And finally, and somewhat begrudgingly, allow line item veto authority to the president. I'm not a fan of expanding any powers to the president, and we need to start scaling them back, period. Of course, put a limit on how many line item vetoes they can use per bill. But that would deter more peculiar earmarks and could eliminate the standoffs we've seen recently between the legislative and executive branches. The 2022 Omnibus Bill is a preview of more to come. Both parties are responsible for our current national debt, and both parties are guilty of pork barrel spending. It's understandable that opinions range on how taxes are used, and that's okay. But at the very least, bills must be transparent in effort for accountability, and tax spending needs to be held in moderation. It's this erratic behind closed doors spending that strains Americans' confidence in government. And it will take our voice in selecting representatives that balance our tax money with our desires, while being compassionate to those who may oppose it.